Now, to summarize what we just went over here, all these branches of the abdominal aorta can be kind of classified into two sets here. We can have paired branches, meaning there's a left and a right, so there are two of them. And then there are unpaired, as in there's only one of them. So with our paired branches, we have that inferior phrenic artery, which were the topmost going to the diaphragm. We have the suprarenal arteries that were going to the suprarenal or adrenal glands. We also had the renal arteries, which go to the kidneys, the gonadal arteries, and then also something called the lumbar arteries that go to the lumbar region. Those are also paired branches that come off the abdominal aorta. Whereas the unpaired branches, so there's only one of them, first off, we had the celiac trunk. We also had the superior mesenteric artery. And then finally, we had the inferior mesenteric artery. And that's the arterial system, but unfortunately, we still have to do the venous side as well. So our major blood vessel in the abdominal region that has to be on the venous side is called the inferior vena cava, which we touched on briefly when we talked about the heart. But this is a large, flat vein that kind of lies right over that vertebral column, and it's a very big blood vessel as well. It's just going to be draining everything below the diaphragm, except for those digestive organs. Now, because blood, venous blood specifically, is going directionally back to the heart, it's going to go a little bit opposite of what we just saw. So these common iliac veins actually come together and form the inferior vena cava. And then two vessels actually come together to form each common iliac vein, where it's external iliac vein, which is the same thing as femoral vein. But as femoral vein is going back to the heart, once it passes the inguinal canal, it becomes external iliac vein. And then external iliac vein will meet up with internal iliac vein coming from those deep pelvic structures, and they'll form the common iliac vein. Now, the common iliac vein, again, will meet up with the other common iliac vein, and then they'll form the inferior vena cava. That's what we see going on in this picture. So here is our inguinal canal here, the inguinal ligament going all the way across, and then femoral vein coming up. Once it crosses this ligament, it is external iliac vein. It's meeting up with internal iliac vein, and they form the common iliac vein on that side. Now, this common iliac vein here will meet up with the other side common iliac vein, and then they'll form this very large vessel, which will be the inferior vena cava, that will run all the way up to the right atrium. Now, branches that are actually going to drain into the inferior vena cava get a little bit different than what we saw with the arteries. Now, the right side, all of that is going to be just the exact same that we saw with the arteries. So we're still going to have the right gonadal vein that's going to drain straight into the inferior vena cava. The right renal vein also goes straight into the inferior vena cava, and also the left one goes into the inferior vena cava. And then the right suprarenal vein will go directly into the inferior vena cava. But on the left side, it's just a little bit different. On the left side, left gonadal vein will actually drain into left renal vein first. And then on the other side still with left renal vein, left suprarenal vein is actually going to drain into the top of left renal vein as well. So on the left side, most of these veins are going to go straight through renal vein before their blood can go directly into the inferior vena cava. That also has to do with the phrenic veins, the same thing. Right side goes directly into the inferior vena cava. The left inferior phrenic vein is actually going to dump into the suprarenal vein. We also have hepatic veins. So these are going to be on the back of the liver, draining the blood that goes to the liver first. So we'll talk more about the blood going to the liver first from the intestines. But once the liver has processed the blood, it has to return back to the inferior vena cava, and that's what these vessels are doing. They're draining the blood from the liver that has already been processed and taking it back into the inferior vena cava.